Everyone. You are in the first session for the Northwest Lakes Conference. So my name's Lisa Burns, and I'm going to be the moderator for today. And welcome everyone to the session Grindstone Lake Foundation, driven to preserve a natural treasure. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Cindy Parker. And Cindy is the president and founding board member of the Grindstone Lake Foundation Incorporated. She's an attorney in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where she practices in the area of estate planning, probate, trust administration, taxation, and real estate. She also assists clients in the formation and administration of nonprofit entities. Cindy and her husband Reed have been enjoying Grindstone Lake since 2012. So Cindy has asked that we keep questions till the end. And as you guys are probably starting to get a little familiar with this Zoom, on the bottom, there's a chat function. So that's where we'll ask you to put your questions and we'll answer them towards the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cindy.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So if you would advance the next screen. So I put on here a national treasure. The brochure had national treasure. I mean, we believe that at Grindstone Lake that it is a natural treasure as well. And shoot, it's good enough, and we're going to continue to maintain it so that it potentially does become a national treasure. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial, obviously, of a Grindstone Lake. Grindstone Lake is approximately 7 miles southeast of Hayward. And the property circled right there is a Cranberry Bog, which we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So Eric was saying that he's going to be at Grindstone Lake this coming week. And so here's a little bit about it. We are a lake that is over 3,000 acres. We have just shy of 12 miles of shoreline. It's part of the Cedar River watershed. That's a 9,500 acre watershed. And the east half of the lake is actually on the Cedar Reservation. Next slide, please. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has listed Grindstone Lake as an outstanding resource water. We have a high water clarity right now of 17 feet. That was the Secchi depth was taken in 2018. And the Cedar Conservation Department does this on an annual basis, but at this point in time, I only have the 2018 information. But the problem we're having is that our clarity has been declining 4 inches since the mid-1990s, excuse me. We certainly have phosphorus concerns of runoff and also development pressures. We all love our lakes and we all want to have that nice lake home. And we are hoping to combat that a little bit. Next slide, please. So this is the Cranberry Bog. It's 57 acres, 1,500 feet of shoreline. It's bounded by County Road K, Sawyer County Road K, the DNR's public boat landing to the west, and on the east side, private property owners. And along the shoreline, there is a natural ice ridge. Go ahead, please, and change the slide. This is an aerial shot from 1938. And the circle is our bog. It was originally a non-forested wetland. Next slide, please. So from what we have gathered of the history, this property was converted from the wetlands to cranberry bogs about that 1938 timeframe. It was expanded in the 1960s and the 1980s. 27 acres from the lake shore to the rear of the property, as well as 29 acres along Highway K, County Highway K. There are 2 inlets or irrigation ports that cut into that ice ridge into the lake. And there are irrigation ditches, and water from the lake was used to harvest the cranberries. Next slide, please. So here's a map of the development with the various segments. In the 1930s, you can see that first portion at the very top. And then in the 60s, there were more additional growing cells created. The 1980s as well, and continued on in 1990. And next slide, please. So approximately 2007, the Cranberry Bog was sold, and a developer came in and was interested in putting 64 units with the wetlands being dredged for a marina for those units. Wisconsin DNR did not approve of that particular development. And about that time, the Grindstone Lake Association became very heavily involved in the bog activities. They coordinated public hearings, went to public hearings. They identified strategies and tried to work with the developer to reduce the impact on that property and to protect some of the wetlands. So from a 64 unit development, it was down to 31 units. Next slide, please. There we go. And this is the 31 unit development that they were looking at. You know, the dotted area is the wetlands. And how in the world are the individuals who are going to purchase these properties going to get to the lake? So it was certainly a challenge to come up with this, and our Grindstone Lake Association worked very hard in order to come up with some plan that would at least maintain those wetlands. And the next slide, please. Well, and according to the developer and what we found, that proposal would fail. The money was just not there when they would sell these properties. So it continued then as a cranberry bog until we believe the early 2000s. And there are always development proposals that were coming through and being discussed at this time. So this picture is from the bog. All of the pictures here are from the bog, and that goes out to the lake. There's a little inlet where there's the trees are parted. There's a little inlet there. And the next slide, please. So there had always been discussion at the Grindstone Lake Association annual meetings of creating a foundation, or at least trying to obtain ownership of that land. And then at the annual meeting in July of 2018, we discussed it further, and the formation of the foundation was considered, and a committee was put forth to establish that foundation. And the idea behind the foundation, again, was to purchase and preserve this land. Next slide. So the Grindstone Lake Foundation was formed. Now, it is a Wisconsin nonprofit corporation. It's a charitable organization affiliated with the Grindstone Lake Association. We do work very closely together. And the purpose of our foundation is to protect, preserve the water quality of Grindstone Lake, prevent pollution, particularly phosphorus pollution. We want to create habitat beneficial to the native aquatic plants and animals. And we want to research and study water quality issues and educate the public regarding responsible stewardship of the Grindstone Lake. So part of creating a nonprofit corporation in Wisconsin is to prepare articles of incorporation and file those with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions. And each year, to maintain your status, you have to file an annual report. Part of the process is also to form bylaws by which your entity, your organization, is going to be managed. Next slide, please. But just creating a nonprofit corporation doesn't make you a charity. What you also need to do is file an application with the IRS for 501c3 status. So that status, the application itself is a Form 1023. It is 28 pages long. It was paper at the time that we became a foundation. Right now, it's all on online application, and there is a $600 fee with this application. There is another process that you can use. It's an easy form, but you have to look ahead at what amount of assets, what do you expect to receive in funds for the next 3 years. If you are expecting more than $50,000 in the next 3 years, then you have to go to the larger 1023 form. And that's what we had actually intended to do, hoping to gather sufficient monies to buy this property. Now, once you file your application with the IRS, it takes time. It's up to 6 months. That's been the usual time frame that I have found with other clients, as well as the Grindstone Lake Foundation. So that actually does present a fundraising problem. How are you supposed to ask for money from people and you don't know whether you will have that 501c3 status, which will allow them to deduct their contribution on their taxes? Next slide, please. But we had a bigger problem. We were just getting formed, and then had discussions with the landowner. But September 17, 2018, the Cranberry Bog went up for sale through an online auction. So those of us who were on the board at the time, anxiously sat and waited to see what that final auction price would be. It was approximately $750,000. And we thought, well, let's see what we can do. We'll find out who that bidder is once they've closed on the property, and maybe we can work something out with them. But then we found out that an anonymous Grindstone Lake property owner had won the bid, and they were willing to work with us. They assigned the purchase agreement to the foundation and provided a loan for the acquisition. So Grindstone Lake Inc., Foundation Inc., is the title holder to the property. Next, please. So along this process, we wanted to come up with a vision. What did we want to do with this land? What do we want to do as a foundation? And clear became our vision. Conservation, protect the water quality and the clarity of this outstanding resource water. Restore the wetlands and native species to the area. Have a legacy for our children, grandchildren, future generations. Right now, there are a number of families that have owned property through 4 generations. And we want to continue that and hopefully have our children want to maintain this pristine lake. Education. Education is important. How do we teach about the history of the land, cranberry farming, native plants, lakeshore? How do we maintain our lakeshore? And we wanted to add value. When you maintain your water clarity, there is a positive impact on property values. And I can attest to that. We had 2 neighbors that have sold their properties a couple years ago, and we continually get listings for, we have people that want to be on Grindstone Lake. Or do you want to sell your property? No, we love this lake too. And recreation. So we're looking at this property, and there are a number of level walkways, so to speak, where the cranberry cells were contained within. We're looking to have walking, hiking paths, skiing. That would be cross-country skiing for those of us who are novice and want something nice and level to learn on, snowshoeing, and picnicking. Next slide, please. So our plan right now, we are still fundraising, and I will get into that a little bit more here, is to get clear title to the land, establish conservation easements to permanently protect this land, create recreational areas, picnic areas, educational areas, and to restore the wetlands. And there is an upland prairie portion of the property as well. Next slide. So 2 phases we have that we are working on. That gaining that clear title to the property, and also then permanently protecting the land with conservation easements. Then we will move on, excuse me, thank you, to provide for those recreational activities and the restoration. Okay, next slide, please. So phase 1, raise $800,000. We were looking to Grindstone Lake homeowners, area businesses, friends of the lake, apply for acquisition fund grants, and collaborate with Town of Bass Lake, Sawyer County. And we've also had the pleasure of working with Landmark Conservancy, and they have been very, very helpful in guiding us through this process as well. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, it takes about 6 months to get your determination letter from the IRS. So how do you raise funds without being this 501c3 entity? Well, pledges. So we had several people that wanted to make a donation, but until we had that letter in hand, they provided us with a pledge that said, as soon as you obtain that status, we're going to give you some money. And it did come through about 6 months later, March of 2019. Now, when you apply for your 501c3 status, it will go back to the effective date of your incorporation, which, and I know that there was a typo in the other slide, but it was actually July 30th of 2018. So it went back retroactively, but again, people are not necessarily inclined to give you money if they don't know whether or not they can deduct that on their taxes. So with that tax determination letter, we are also now eligible to apply for grants. So how do you start the fundraising process? Well, we did hire a consultant to assist us. They provided us some nice pieces of for publication, but we did not find them as helpful as we had hoped. So with our collaboration with the Grindstone Lake Association at their annual meeting then in 2019, we combined our meetings and presented to the Lake Association members what we were doing and what we were hoping to do with this land purchase. And the 2019 meeting was in person, which was great. And then from there, we also, our board members are scattered at various locations around the lake. And we went to our neighbors and held small neighborhood gatherings to inform as well for those people that did not make it to the association meeting. Next slide, please. So so we already are the owners of the land, but how do we apply for a land acquisition grant if we already acquired the property? Well, we contacted the Wisconsin DNR and worked with them, and we obtained what was called a land acquisition letter of retroactivity, wherein they provided us with a time frame to which would qualify us to apply for a land acquisition grant. We also became an eligible nonprofit conservation organization, also through the Wisconsin DNR. And then we began the process of applying for that land acquisition grant. Now, as part of the land acquisition grant application, we had to obtain an appraisal on the property. And what we found out during the appraisal process is there are two types of appraisals. There is an appraisal that you can use for state land acquisition funds. And then there is also the application or the appraisal that you would need for federal grants. So if you are looking to apply for federal grants and you need an appraisal, make sure that you are looking at that particular aspect of your appraisal. And then also part of that grant is preparing a property or land management plan, a proposed plan. Next slide. And we were very fortunate. We have a great group of board members, and we received the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Land Acquisition Grant, and this is through the Surface Water Protection Program. And we did obtain the maximum amount of $200,000. So from there, we had some exciting news to tell at our annual meeting in 2020. However, we had to hold that as a Zoom meeting. It was a little disappointing that we couldn't be in person to share this news, but the Zoom meeting went well, and through that annual meeting, we received additional pledges and donations. Next slide. And by August of 2020, we had raised over $410,000 in grants, pledges, and donations. Then, next slide, through a mailing campaign at the end of 2020, we raised another $50,000. So communication to our members has been key. Next slide. So our phase 1 results and our to-do. So we've raised $460,000. We are going to protect the property because the land acquisition grant requires a conservation easement on the property, but we still have a little ways to go. We need to raise $375,000 by the end of the year, and we intend to do that by talking to our existing donors, reviewing those whom we haven't heard from yet, and expand our donor list and our outreach. We are also very fortunate that we have a donor who has, and we are just announcing this through our Grindstone Lake Association newsletter that's going out, have a donor who has given us a $200,000 matching program. So people will hopefully be more willing to donate, knowing that their dollar is going to double and help out the foundation in its quest to get clear title to the property. And the next slide, please. So phase 2, our property management plan and our implementation of that. So the management plan and principles, and then we also have some preliminary designs in that implementation. And the next slide. So first we'll go through the management principles and objectives, and then we'll take a look at some of the preliminary designs. Next slide. As we continue, as I mentioned before, and we will, our main focus is protect and enhance the Grindstone Lake water quality, habitat preservation, and restoration. Next. We want to enhance our recreation and public access. We want to educate citizens and property owners and establish partnerships. So our objectives here in the protection and enhancement of the lake water quality, we are concerned about phosphorus loads. Now, one of the things that we will be looking to do, we haven't done, is to take soil samples of the bog property to determine if there is any residual phosphorus and other problems within from the Cranberry Bog organization, but we aren't sure of that just yet. And then we also want to reduce the shoreline sediment loads. We want to preserve the habitat. There are lowland wetlands. There's an upper prairie, and then there's also a small forested area on the property. Next slide. And this shows some of the area as well. You have the lower elevation. That Cranberry area is the lower level wetlands. The upper elevation that was a Cranberry area there's a portion that is wetlands, and also then a prairie area and our forested uplands as well. There are also some buildings on the property, some of which will need to be taken down. So we'll be looking to clear that out as well. Next slide. So we'd also like to enhance non-motorized trails, boardwalks potentially over the wetlands. And what we heard in talking to people is like, well, if you're going to make this a park, I don't want to have to, I'm on this beautiful lake. I don't want to have to get in my car and drive all the way around the lake to get to this beautiful park that you're going to make for us. So we also want to make sure that there is some lake access to the property as well. And the next slide. And then we also want to educate people, citizens, property owners, signage along the walkways that we intend to have, and shoreline restoration, wetland restoration. We're hoping to have demonstration sites as an educational component of the property management. And the next slide. And certainly in doing this, we want to establish partnerships. We have talked to the LCO College, their science professor there, and Hayward Community Schools has an environmental school that we have made introductions to, and hopefully they will be able to use this land for educational purposes for their students as well. We'll continue to work with the town of Bass Lake and Sawyer County. Now, Sawyer County was in the process of updating their plan for outdoor recreation. If you are looking to have or to partner with a government entity, that entity for some federal grants needs to have this outdoor recreation plan. What just so happens that we were in contact with Sawyer County at the time that they were revising and updating their outdoor recreation plan. It is now going from 2021 to 2025. And as part of their outdoor recreation plan, they have listed our project in their nature study and hiking trails section as part of their the needs of the county. So we're very ecstatic that we were actually specifically listed in their plan. As I mentioned before, we are working and talking to Landmark Conservancy, and then hopefully businesses, outreaching to businesses and other resorts, etc., around the area. Next slide, please. Now the preliminary plans. Next slide. So the University of Wisconsin Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture has a program that their landscape architect students need to complete for their senior year. My son here in Iowa is a forester, and at Iowa State University, he had a particular program that he was working on for his forestry degree, where he and a group of individuals went to a nonprofit, and they were looking to restore some land that they had at a church camp, and to provide them with a natural prairie. So I thought, well, there's got to be something in the state of Wisconsin. And I happened to find this, what they call the capstone project. So we applied for that project last summer, asking if, here's our project, here's what we want to do. Maybe a landscape architect student would be willing to work with us on this project. And Billy Atchison, who is from northern Minnesota, chose our project to work on. This is an entire year, so it begins for the student in September and goes through until May, when the final presentation was given to us. And all along, there is a steering committee to talk with him, to tell him what we would like to see out of this property. Now, part of his studies are to determine the history. It was a cranberry bog. What happens when you renovate and try to restore a cranberry bog back to wetlands? And so this was a really exciting project for us. They do this every year. So if anyone has a project that they're interested in, the application process has started and opened up. And you have to have your application to the University of Wisconsin, the professor in charge of that, by August 14th of this summer. So I'd be happy to share that information with anyone if they have a project that they would like to attempt to have some guidance on. Next slide, please. So part of that project goes from basically start to finish. And we are just focusing in on his preliminary work right now as part of our phase. Excuse me. This is the site. So if you see the green area, that's the lower wetland area. The lighter shaded is an upper wetland, and there's some prairie in there as well. And then the forested area where we do have some existing buildings. Next slide, please. So now we're wanting to restore the native landscape and potentially have a nature-based education campus. This is certainly a number of years down the road, but we are hoping that we will get there soon. Next slide. So this is what restoring some of the native landscape may look like. There are some trails that are listed in here too. And this didn't come through very well. I apologize. I'm noticing the typing issues here. So we have the wetlands, and we're looking to have some trails that go across the wetlands. Right now, there are various cells. We know that we are going to have to get rid of some irrigation equipment. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but getting rid of irrigation and putting together some educational, ecological trails within the property is mainly what we are focusing on as well. And the next. So the education-based portion of the campus, we are looking at having even potentially a bird tower was part of his programming, and a workshop area, outdoor classrooms, picnicking areas, camping areas, but keeping some of this ecosystem. So the tamarack and spruce are over on the forested areas that are around the wetlands. And then there would be the open bog, which we would also, these are the wetlands that we would do and work with as well. Next, please. So our next steps, raising the $375,000 by the end of this year. When you finalizing our property management plan. So when you receive the DNR land acquisition grant, you put a proposed property management plan in there. When you are requesting those funds from the grant, then a final property management plan has to be submitted as well. And that will provide us with getting the DNR funds. And that will, again, then help us clear title to the property. Next, there we go. And along with those lines of getting that DNR grant will be permanent land protection. It will be a recorded conservation easement. And then we will continue to raise funds for the property restoration, our trail and education programming. I know our keynote speaker talked about us all working together locally, and I don't know who this quote comes from, but I think it's very appropriate, and it's think globally, act locally. And that's what we're trying to do at the Grindstone Lake Foundation, along with our Grindstone Lake Association. And with that, I think I finished just a little early here. And these are our board of directors.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Cindy? Wow, this was a awesome presentation. It's just awesome how the whole community came together to help out with supporting this.
We've been very fortunate, and the Grindstone Lake Association has been key to this, because through their membership, we also have emails for many of our Grindstone Lake landowners, besides just addresses to send things off to. So we've been able to send out email notices and emails to people that says, here's what we're doing, here's what we're looking forward to. So so that's been very helpful as well.
All right, Cindy, it looks like we do have a question. It says, is there a reason why you did not use the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund for this excellent project?
We actually looked into that as well. Our letter of retroactivity had expired, and we were informed that basically took us out of the running. But that was one of the reasons we made sure that that our appraisal was also eligible for federal grant funding.
Okay, I had a question. How many, maybe you mentioned this, two questions actually. How many acres was the bog and how many members are part of this foundation?
So the members of the foundation are actually the members of the association. So we are linked in that respect. Then the bog itself is 57 acres with just a little over 1,500 feet of shoreline. And so one of the things we'd like to do is to work with our association and have sort of demonstrations of shoreline protection on this particular property.
This is Eric. I have a question. It's kind of a technical one maybe, but I think it's important for maybe the foundation and the association to think about a previous lake group in the county, in the southwest corner of the county on Little Sisibagama, had purchased a property on the lake in a similar kind of situation to protect it from further development. And they learned that when they went to the county to seek tax exemption for the property so that the lake association would not have to pay property taxes on it, the county denied their request and has still, I think, maintained sort of a denial status towards trying to get the property tax exempt. Can you talk a bit about what your group understands of the tax exemption process for property taxes and how the county has interacted with you on that?
Oh, yes, we have actually, we also attempted to obtain property tax exemption through the Bass Lake Township. We were denied partly, even though we are a 501c3, we were told that we didn't have an educational component. And if we do have that educational component on our property, we can come back and request that tax exempt status for the property taxes. It's a little different. Just because you are a tax exempt entity does not mean that you are exempt from property taxes. So there are specific guidelines to do that. We thought we were within those guidelines, but the Bass Lake did not believe we were. We talked to the assessor, and he actually has been very helpful in sort of guiding us as to what our next steps would be in order to become tax exempt for the property taxes.
Thanks. And I guess a follow-up question before we get back into the chat, I'll let Lisa answer or take on some of the questions in the chat. But in the process then, did you consider forming a lake district on the lake in order to both potentially raise money needed for this project, but also as a local unit of government, then the lake district owning the property would make it automatically tax-free?
No, we did not. We did not go down that route. I have no other answer other than we did not explore that aspect of tax exemption.
Okay, a couple more questions came in through the chat. Do you know if a lake association is already a 501(c)(3). Oh, hold on, I just lost my question. Are they automatically eligible to be a charitable organization?
If they are a 501c3, and the Grindstone Lake Association is a 501c3 organization, so funds going to it are also tax exempt and are eligible for charitable deductions on people's income tax returns. So they are a charity. I guess I'm not sure of the rest of the question.
Yep, and then just a different question. What are the biggest challenges and what resources um, would you still need to have help with the acquisition?
The biggest challenge, and a lot of it was last year, that we couldn't get in front of people to make our case and to provide them with more information about our project and the donations that we require. We are hoping to do more of that this year. We will have our Grindstone Lake Association / and the foundation annual meeting in July. And then from there, we are looking to have some smaller gatherings with individuals that we believe will be able to assist us with that future fundraising and provide some additional support.
Great. Okay. Donna Carlson posted a link here on our chat where the donations and pledges can be accepted. So,
Thank you, Donna.
any other questions or comments?
This is Eric again. Just one more question. In your interactions with the town, then did you find them to be sort of responsive or sort of supportive of this project, or were they resistant? How would you characterize local elected officials and maybe like the local year-round population, how they react to this project?
We have one of the board of supervisors, a board supervisor who has been an active participant and is very wanting us to continue and being very supportive of us. There are others that are not sure why we need to have a park. So that seems to be some of the discussion among some of the board members. And when we went before our tax exempt to request our property tax exemption, a number of people said, well, a number of the board of supervisors said, well, I talk to people and they don't understand why they'd even be eligible for, not to pay property taxes. So we still have a lot of education to do as far as what we are trying to do with this property. And again, I think 2020 and not being able to get in front of people to make those presentations was a factor in setting us back a little bit or slowing the process down.
Sure. I know just from interactions with other lake groups around the state and other projects like this, that a common response is to fret or worry about the taking of value off the property tax roll. The idea that whatever this value is, that's going to diminish the taxable value for the town and for the county. And yet, when you look at some of these places, these are places where the taxable value is growing kind of the fastest in Wisconsin, outside of places like Dane County and downtown Milwaukee, where people are putting up $30 million structures. The tax value around lakes is growing very fast. And if higher property values somehow solved the tax problem or made everybody's lives easier, then around lakes, you would find all these happy people who are like, oh, wow, everything's been figured out because our property values went up so fast. And that's just not the case. It's a simplistic, I think, way to look at the world, to think like somehow higher values are going to lead to lower taxes. But it just doesn't play out in reality. Every place you go and find values going up, you still find people complaining about their property taxes. And so I would try to, I don't know the exact answer, but somehow you have to get people to think holistically about whether or not having however many millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on the tax roll is really going to benefit anyone in the town.
And the tax rolls for the property prior to our purchase it was agriculture.
Right.
So it's not a lot of money that would have been the issue.
Right.
But I think that's also something that we need to present more thoroughly. And as I mentioned before, I mean, we had 2 neighbors that sold their homes for over $500,000, and that was just a couple years ago. And people are clamoring to get on these lakes. And if we can continue to keep this as an outstanding resource water, this is a big part of doing that, is to keep the flow of phosphorus off, educate our owners not to, as our keynote speaker said, urbanize their property and their land up to the shoreline. So that is all our hope in educating as well.
Yeah, and I hate to be stuck on this, but I find it so frustrating then that the town and the county want to ask you all not only to raise the money needed to do this whole project and to implement everything, but also you should be chipping in some money to fund the schools and to fund the county government and the town government, when everybody around the lake who's part of this effort is already paying that through their regular property taxes as well.
And as I mentioned, our assessor was very the county or the township assessor was very interested in helping us and telling us what we would need in order to become a property tax exempt entity, so to speak.
And I could just share, as the executive director of Landmark Conservancy, we pay a significant amount of property tax. So this is a very challenging waters to get navigated in some of these small rural communities. We've actually found paying the property taxes keeps people in good graces. Other times, Rick has figured out a way to get some of our property exempt, but it is not unusual for land trusts to have significant property tax as part of their operating budget. And Cindy, you did an amazing job presenting this project. Great job.
Appreciate it, Lindsay.
Yeah, this is awesome. It's just a really cool little piece of property up here in the northwest part of the state. So it'll be interesting and fun to go to someday and check out all the workshops and check out your little campus you're getting together.
Please do. It is, the property is accessible off County K. There is a driveway there, although we've tried to have a lot of Grindstone Lake owners come out and take a look, and we're hoping to do some more of that here this summer as well.
Great. Well, with that, if nobody's got any other questions, I guess you could use your little reaction button on the bottom and give Cindy an applause, thumbs up, a Yahoo. Thanks, Cindy, so much. Appreciate you presenting today.
Thank you very much.
So our next presentation doesn't start until noon. So we're kind of basically taking a little lunch break away from the computer. So take advantage of the nice weather, and we'll see everybody again